Hey, folks, tip of the cap to you. Thank you for joining us here at the Pilot Money Guys podcast. Flight 15, we're going to talk about the 4% rule. This is the place we aim to give you some lighthearted financial fun. And we usually talk about some airline news. But today, a little bit different. We're going to be talking about the top 10 flying movies of all time. I'm your host, Rob Eklund. Flight crew today, also known as Rubber Mallet by those I don't like. Your flight crew today is the Godfather CFP, Charlie Mattingly. Welcome, Charlie.
Thank you, Rob.
Charlie's a little under the weather. Cut him some slack, folks.
That's right.
But we've got Mr. Cowbell, Ben Dickinson. Welcome, Ben.
Glad to be here, and I'm feeling 100%. So
Nice.
it's gonna be good, and we're gonna make sure that Charlie gets through this.
Pick up the slack, man. Pick up
Charlie's slack.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to. All right.
Seriously.
Excellent. Well, we're talking, we got a lot of good feedback allegedly about the top 10 list. So we're going top 10 flying movies. The number 10 of all time top flying movie is Dr. Strangelove with a lot of folks, but one of them is James Earl Jones, is the Bombardier. Anyways, the best quote I think from that movie is, "Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room." Number 9. Ben, what do you got?
We got Air America. I don't want to crash twice in one day. Don't worry. I crash better than anyone I know.
Nice. Love it.
Pretty good.
Nice.
Charlie, number 8.
All right. Number 8 is Strategic Air Command with Jimmy Stewart. Something about It's a Wonderful Life. Maybe. Was that the right one? Am I getting those confused? Something about an angel in that movie.
Not the same.
Not the same.
Brigadier General Jimmy.
I thought that was where the bell rings on the Christmas tree and the angel gets his wings.
Didn't Reagan make Jimmy Stewart a major general later on? He did. I'm pretty sure he did. Yeah.
Okay.
So take that. Number 7 is maybe critically acclaimed Hot Shots with Lloyd Bridges. Famous quote or a little excerpt. "Gentlemen, we've waited a long time to hear this. In exactly 5 hours and 17 minutes, we hit the enemy toast." Or I think that's enemy coast, sir. Coast, that'll take a bit more planning, but it doesn't matter. Number 6. Ben, what do you got?
Flight of the Intruder with William Dafoe and Danny Glover. If only for the line, this is going to be the most exciting thing you've done with your clothes on, Doc.
Oh, maybe the best line in aviation flying history movie in the movie world, that is. Number 5, great stuff. Charlie, what do you got?
The Right Stuff coming at number 5. You had a great quote, something about ghosts in the air, demons in the air.
Oh, that's there was a demon that lived in the air. They said whoever challenged him would die. Their controls would freeze up, their planes would buffet wildly, and they would disintegrate. The demon lived at Mach 1 on the meter. 750 miles an hour where the air could no longer move out of the way. He lived behind a barrier through which they said no man could ever pass. They called it the sound barrier.
Whoa, that's scary.
That was obviously that one could be arguably be number 1, I think.
Yeah, that's good.
In my mind. Number 4, Command Decision, Clark Gable. The movie itself, not that great, but the trailer's fantastic and epic, and it goes something like this. Here told with shattering impact is the inside, the mysterious, the hitherto top secret chronicle of men who shook the very earth itself, whose spirit is embattled but whose hearts are with their families, and one woman thousands of miles away.
Wow.
Yeah,
Dude.
I mean,
we
could just stop the podcast right here.
Nice.
We put that at 4 based on the fact that the movie isn't good, but the trailer's awesome. Is that right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Okay, here I go. You're going to have to land this plane. Ted Stryker says, "Surely you can't be serious." "I am serious, and don't call me Shirley."
That's,
Nice.
I mean,
wait about this. We got another one. A hospital. What is it? A big white building with lots of sick people, but that's not important.
So classic. Okay, number 10. I'm going to take, because I switched it to make it financial planning because it's so well known by everyone listening probably. Top Gun, obviously. Number 2. Ben, it's not your financial planning, it's your attitude. The crypto markets are dangerous, but right now you're worse than Bitcoin. You're dangerous and foolish. You may not like the guys financially planning with you. They may not like you, but whose side are you on?
That's a
Wow.
little bit too close to home. A little bit too true.
I only kid because I love Ben Cowbell.
I love that though. I mean, as Bitcoin Jesus, I can say I am a little too into crypto, and
Mhm.
cryptos are dangerous. Disclaimer.
Yes. Number one, Charlie, bring it home for us. I mean, this one
Number
doesn't even-
one, Memphis Belle.
Yeah.
That's it.
No quote necessary.
No quote necessary. B-17 crew flying their 25th and final sortie
Wow.
into Germany. Notables left off this list. I know a lot of people are thinking, where's Iron Eagle? Where's Snakes on a Plane? Where's
Iron
Con Air?
Eagle.
That's what I was wondering.
Didn't make it. Yep. All right, enough of that. Let's get into our financial topic of the day, the 4% rule. What is it? How do we think about it? Let's dissect this a little bit. Who wants to take first shot at this?
Let's do this.
Oh,
what about
I
a
can.
definition? Ben, Rob, you got a definition?
Well, yeah, I can do a little definition.
Get it. Get after
You ready?
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. So 4% rule. You've worked hard. You've saved for retirement, and now you're ready to take some money out of your accounts, but you don't know how much you can spend. If you spend too much, you may run out. If you spend too little, you may not be able to do the things you want. So the 4% rule is a way to figure out how much you can withdraw from your retirement accounts, and hopefully, and most, with high probability, not run out of your money. So the 4% rule is take 4% of your total retirement accounts that you retire, and you can withdraw 4% of that amount. So for instance, if you have $1 million in your entire retirement accounts, then your first year you could take out $40,000. That's 4% of $1 million. And each year you increase the amount that you withdraw based on inflation. So you can adjust it just by the cost of living, and that money should, with a high probability, last you for about 30 years. So that is a very common rule. We hear it a lot. There's millions of articles about it. It's probably the first thing that comes up if you Google how much can I take out of my retirement accounts, would you say?
Nice
job.
Absolutely.
Ben,
Well done.
Ben just-
I would say the 4% rule should not be called the 4% rule. I contend it would be the 4% guideline or rule of thumb, but not by any means, right? So
like that.
Little history here for us nerds. Developed by William Bingham it was published back in 1994 in the October issue of the Journal of Finance. He's a native of Brooklyn. Do you guys happen to know what Bill Bingham did for a living prior to becoming a financial advisor? Anyone?
Excavator.
Close. He got a Bachelor of Science from MIT in aeronautics and astronautics.
Wow.
And he co-authored topics in advanced model rocketry at MIT, I guess. So I don't know that he's still doing anything, but yeah, he was, at least some of the research I said, he was still doing stuff up through the 2000s.
Wow.
I don't know if he's still doing stuff. That's a great question. We'll have to put that in the
Maybe
show
a
notes.
podcast guest. Or you
be
should
awesome.
definitely tune into the show. You would enjoy it.
Yeah, for sure. But originally it was taking 50% large cap stocks, low cost index funds ish, and 50% bonds. And it doesn't get into the bonds too much, or at least I didn't see that in any of my research. And like you said, 30% withdrawal, what they consider a safe withdrawal rate. Which, is there such a thing? Is there just one number, Charlie, do you think? That's just one number that we can say is a safe withdrawal rate?
No way. In fact, that's one of the drawbacks about this. It's so rigid, and like you said, or alluded to at least, Rob, is rules of thumb. I don't really know what they're good for. If you're planning for retirement, I don't think this is something, maybe just give you an idea, ballpark, big time ballpark, but there's a lot of assumptions that go into it that may not apply to you, a lot of them, such as historical rates of return, such as your time horizon, risk tolerance, etc. So yeah, absolutely.
Not to mention that most people spend less in the future than they throughout their retirement. They actually decrease their spending over time rather than increase it. This rule actually says you increase it. Oh, that's a train. Ignore that.
Yeah, I think what's interesting too there's so many assumptions that go into it. And he later went back and looked at, okay, let's just not look at large cap funds. Let's throw in some small cap, and surprise, the rule, or the 4%, moves to 4.5% when he throws in small cap funds, which is no surprise because we are always talking about, where returns come from, and a lot of returns come from small cap funds and dimensional fund advisors, and we've talked ad nauseum about that. We'll maybe talk more about it, but very interesting how it moved from 4% to 4.5%, throwing in different asset classes, or at least different diversification methods.
Yeah. Hey, I think what Ben mentioned is really critical in that as when we're working with clients, firstly, we don't want anybody to run out of money. We don't want that to be even an issue that they have to worry about. That's a big fear that people have. So we want to alleviate that fear, really quickly. The second biggest fear that I have as far as retirement income is I don't want to shortchange people early on in retirement. I really want to get this right, especially when they're newly retired, they're most active, ready to travel, ready to go. What are these? The go-go years? Is that right, Rob? The go-go,
Yeah.
no-go,
Go,
or
slow go, and no go. Yeah.
that's right.
Three
Yeah,
phases. So
that's
go,
right.
slow go, no go. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
one of the things that the 4% rule with the assumptions of 50 stock, 50 bond, we could talk about allocation a lot and what the assumptions are for future returns versus past. Not to mention 30 years, of life expectancy. Maybe that's not an appropriate number either. But what I think is very interesting, and that is the assumption that it's a 100% level of confidence. Now that's interesting because when we do our planning, we also come up with a probability of success or level of confidence. And let me take a minute to explain what that is. It's a Monte Carlo analysis where you run 1,000 different stock market scenarios, different rates of return, a different order of return. And so then it says out of 1,000 scenarios, you're successful. If your level of confidence was 100%, you're successful 1,000 of 1,000 times. But that's great. And some people think, oh, that's what I want. However, I would argue that you don't want that. I would argue that if you have that level of success in retirement, and this is just my opinion, not advice, but I would argue that you need to spend more money, because you probably have the capacity to do that. And let me give you another example. There was a great study by some people on Michael Kitces's team about what does this probability of success mean or level of confidence. In other words, let's say you didn't have 100, but you had 75%, level of confidence. And I've seen this before with people going into retirement. One of them was a teacher, and she said, "Oh my gosh, I'm getting a C. This is a bad grade." And we've had other people say, hey, if that falls less than 90%, then I'm not going to sleep well at night. But let me explain and maybe put a different framework on this thing. And that is that if you're going into retirement and you're doing these calculations, you have a 75% level of confidence or probability of success. What that really means then is that at some point in your retirement, at some point in the next 30 years, there's a 25% chance that you'll have to make an adjustment.
A change. That's it. Yeah.
A change. So that sounds much better, right? I mean, and so I think that, and this is really called dynamic. If we're talking about the 4% rule, what I'm talking about now is dynamic spending, where you evaluate it every year and you look at the spending, you look at the, markets and what's going on, and you reevaluate. However, personally, I'd rather have the 75% because I'm willing to make an adjustment at some point. And the way that we do this is, and I think people can do this on their own, but you all correct me if I'm wrong, but we dissect it so much that a failure in retirement, let's say the 25% scenario where I got to make a change, it's not like you got to stop spending and eat beans and rice. It just means I got to stop playing golf 5 times a week and maybe cut back to 2. Or maybe I got to downsize my RV just from class A to a fifth wheel. So it's not a fail. It's just, we got to make some adjustments. And again, I think the benefits of dynamic versus the strict of 4%.
And even if you tried to do the strict 4%, and I'm going to put you on the spot here, Ben, a little bit, because you described it perfectly. It was very well done.
Thank you.
How would you even apply that 4% rule? And I think if we walk through that a little bit, the very easy example we're going to get into, it becomes very apparent that this is not something you would actually do in practice. So if you had the $1 million, like you said, how would the 4% rule apply? The first year, you're taking out $40,000, and then you adjust for inflation, say it's 3%, or deflation, right?
Yeah.
Not to mention, hey, you're 50% large cap, and large cap have been crushing it lately, right? So maybe
Yeah.
your million dollars has ballooned up to whatever 1.1, 1.2. Now all of a sudden you're raising your level of spending just because the markets went up. And then conversely, if the markets went down, right, what would you do, Ben? If the markets went
Yeah.
down using the 4% guideline that they talk about, and you're at $1 million and it goes down, and now you only have 800,000. We don't have to get into the exact numbers, but what are you going to do with your spending if you're retired?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rob. And a lot of people that's one of the problems with the 4% rule. It's a problem because a lot of times people will see, oh, well, last year my accounts did great, so this year my 4% is higher than it was last year. But the whole rule hinges on the fact that it's based on the account balance at retirement, that number, not the number that it is year by year. And so that's really tricky with, like you said, 1 year, oh, well, I may have to spend less, but if it's a great year, you're going to be really tempted to be like, well, I'll pull out a lot more because all of a sudden I have so much more money. And that's where that 4% rule falls apart. And so that's why it's a little tricky with this rule.
Yeah, it's definitely gets tricky when you're trying to put it into practice, I think, and it just doesn't really make sense. Why would I, all of a sudden go down to, as opposed to 40,000, I'm going down to 30,000. Can I even do that? Is that possible? And oh yeah, the next year stocks, if it went down 10%, the next year it might be up 20% or 30% or whatever. So that volatility, if you're going strictly by that year to year data, is tough to implement. Which kind of brings up the point when he did the study. Now, this is kind of a warm fuzzy when you think about it. When he did the study, but again, back in 1994, and he's repeated the studies with other things like small cap, it was kind of a worst case scenario, which is kind of a warm fuzzy. Hey, this is 4% rule was based on if a person retired in 1968, historical returns. And that's important to foot stomp. And Charlie got into it a little bit, the difference between historical returns and what can happen. It reminds me of that quote I picked up in the military somewhere, is you don't plan for what you think is going to happen, you plan for what can happen. Is kind of can be used in a lot of ways, and in particularly this way. So he looked back historically at what has happened, which is something to consider. But the 4% rule looks at someone retiring in 1968 and suffering two major bear markets within the first 5 years, and then 10 years of high inflation. And they still lasted for 30 years. Now, something to think about, that was with U.S. investments and a 30-year horizon. If you're shorter, if you're higher, if you're not in the U.S., different diversification methods, it's going to change. So it sounds good, but when we run Monte Carlo, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of the whole Monte Carlo is it's more about what can happen, not the historical returns. It's 1,000 different or whatever, I guess whichever Monte Carlo you're using analysis, and it's going to run through 1,000 different sequence of return scenarios. So, hey, the first year the market goes way down. What's that going to do? And runs it all the way through, and then it gives you that 75%, which is so important. That 75% or whatever percentage comes up with is if you change nothing. So that all that percentage, if you change nothing, that's the percentage that you won't run out of money. And two things here, two fears that I have is running out of money, for sure, is probably the top one, but closely followed, like you said, Charlie, is having too much money when I die. I mean, I don't want to just sit there and eat beans and rice the whole time when I have, a couple mil in the bank.
Yeah, you could have bought that Tesla when you were 65. Now all of a sudden you're 90 and you're like, dang it, I can't get down into a Tesla. I'm too old. I've missed my chance to buy it.
You know? Have you seen the video of those old guys trying to get out of those sports cars? You can't do it. If you're 80, you can't get out of some of these sports cars. So don't wait till you're 80 to buy a sports car.
That's why you got to buy a Buick. You got to buy a Buick.
You can't get out of those things. They sit too low. Hey, what are some alternatives to the 4%?
There's I think the 4%, you can start with that, and it depends on what you're thinking about as far as your retirement. And there's obviously the bucket approach is helpful, and maybe combined with some type of not the 4% per se, but some type of changing percentage, I think is something that is used. Michael Kitces, obviously very prominent financial planner, talks about the bumper rule. So he likes using the 4%. Again, he uses, I think, even more than 4%, 4.5, or maybe even 5% based on the returns and the diversification methods. And he uses the bumper rule where he'll go to 5% plus or minus 2. And he's not going to change. You don't change your spending until you hit one of those bumpers. And so if you think of the bumpers like a bowling alley, and you put for the kids, you put up the bumpers, you know, and the ball hits the sides. So you're not changing your percentage until it hits the sides. But even that, I think, is complicated. So I think Charlie, your point of having somebody to help you with this, not to mention when you're hitting this age, I hate to tell you, but your mental capacity may not be as sharp as it once was. And at some point, it might be for a while, but at some point it won't be. There's likely that it won't be. So having somebody as a backup is helpful on this.
Absolutely. Ben, what you got?
Yeah, I was just gonna throw out probably the easiest one, which is, talk to a financial planner. Get a couple hours. If you're about to retire and you're curious about, hey, how much can I spend year to year in retirement? Spend a couple hours with a financial planner and come up with a plan, what you're going to buy, what you're planning to do in retirement, and how much you have. And, they can help really lay it out, because it is one of those situations that you may, year to year, your spending is going to be maybe completely different. You may want to buy a big boat one year, and, that would ruin your 4% rule right there. So you should really get a plan together. We can run the Monte Carlo scenario, but even just to get a sort of outline of how much you can withdraw year to year. But that I maybe just took the easy way out. I don't know.
I like it. I like it.
That's good. Hey, and do you happen to know any good financial planners?
Charlie, Maddie.
I think there's one on this
Top
call,
notch.
but I'll
Call him up.
Top notch.
But no, this is it's, in all seriousness, I was telling you all, this would take a lot of effort, I think, if you're on your own.
Mm-hmm.
I think it takes a lot of I think you should put a lot of effort into it regardless, because it's worth it. If I learned that I could spend some more money in retirement and do some more stuff, that's pretty cool. Or if I learn that I can prevent myself from having to worry about running out of money, but that's worth the effort, whether it be yourself putting in the time and effort or hiring someone. But I like there's definitely other methods like you talked about, Rob. The bucket approach, we like that one a lot. We think that
can you describe
is
that
really
a little bit? Just like
absolutely. I think it's really effective because of what you said. In fact, you alluded to, the mental capacity. And I would also add on that the emotional capacity. I mean, when we're working and we're accumulating, watching the stock market go up and down is, it's kind of painful. But when you're pulling money out and that's it, it's really painful, right? I mean, so
I just talked to a guy, we're sitting there chatting, and we got into that exact scenario where he was talking about how he was talking to his mom about the COVID crisis, and he was saying, don't do anything. And I said, absolutely. You want to rebalance, do all the different things, but don't pull your money out. She was wanting to pull her money out. And I said, that's so easy for you, or it's a lot easier for you when you have, $30,000 a month paycheck coming in, and you are still saving for retirement. You keep seeing your nest egg get bigger. That's easy to it's easier, still not easy, but it's easier to withstand the ups and downs, or the downs per se, of the market. But when you have stopped, making money, and your nest egg is just dwindling, and that's all it's ever going to do. And that's why I hate the term nest egg. I would prefer the term deferred spending, although it doesn't, have a good mental picture, I guess. But the deferred spending egg is just dwindling, and you see it go down by 30-40%. That's tough to not run for the hills. So that's having a financial planner, having a buddy with you saying, hey, it's going to be okay. It's only bad if you're withdrawing everything this year, which you're not. So having that bucket approach of the 0 to 5 years of pretty riskless money set aside, hey, you're good for 5 years. 5 to 15, maybe a little more risk. And above 15 years, now you got a lot more money, a lot more risk, and you can really withstand those ups and downs.
Yep. Absolutely. You
Love that.
just kind of described the bucket approach, and I'll just pile on a bit, but yeah, you separate those assets. In other words, if I'm in retirement or entering into retirement the year before, then we literally open up new IRAs or new brokerage accounts. We can name them, bucket one, safe money. One guy said play money, fun money, whatever. We can name it. And there's some psychology behind that. There's mental accounting, behind that, where when you see an account that belongs to you and it says short-term retirement money, or whatever you want to call it, bucket one. And then COVID hits and you see that money is stable, relatively stable, especially compared to equities, then man, you are enjoying retirement in the middle of a pandemic as much as you possibly can in the middle of a pandemic without being able to go anywhere. But anyway, you're not stressed out about your income going away because you see that one account and you see that it's not again, it could be down. There's no guarantee, but it's not down as much as the equities usually. So that's really important for our emotional health and our ability to enjoy retirement is to pull those apart. For example, the opposite of that is kind of what you were talking about, where let's say you're in a target date fund. Nothing wrong with target date funds to a certain extent, but when you enter retirement, you have one bucket, so to speak, or one account, and it's one fund. And even if it's 50 stock, 50 bond, it's going to go down, during a bad stock market because there's equities in there and you're not going to be able to distinguish. You're going to feel like your retirement money is going away. And that's very stressful, very stressful. And so that's one of the beauties of the bucket approach. The other thing, and that's kind of a mental, mental, emotional, benefit. And I would tell you that some of the other benefits are that when let's say that bucket one is your conservative next couple years of retirement monies are there, be that bonds, short-term government bonds, whatever, CDs, then when the bad times come along, and we know they will, and equities go down and maybe let's say your bonds go up, sometimes they do that in a bad market. Well, now guess what, we get to sell some of those that went up because our bucket one is too much now. It went up, it's too high. So I'm going to sell some of that stuff and I'm going to buy some bucket three potentially because it went down. So that's really hard to do if you're not, set up to do that. And it's kind of hard to do anyway, quite honestly, because you're, when you're in the middle of a downturn and you're buying more stocks as a retiree, potentially, but that's an advantage. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to rebalance into that and sell high and buy low.
And I think maybe we need to do a whole, let us know, folks, hit us up at info@leadingedgeplanning.com. But I think we might need to do a whole show about that. And I've been thinking about that, maybe writing a paper, white paper on it or something, the target retirement date funds, because that's one of my arguments with it. It sounds so great. Oh, target retirement date. And it's even got the word target in there, which, fighter guys love, right, Charlie? you and Mark would love it. But it's one of those things where, is that accounting for your pension? Is it accounting for your IRAs? Is it accounting for all the different facets of your retirement, inheritance, different scenarios that you're going to go through? It doesn't account for those things. It just is saying you're going to retire this time, and we don't want you to have that much risk at that point. Doesn't use a bucket approach, which is, there's something to be said for having that risk. That's, whether we like it or not, that's where returns come from, is when you have risk. If you're willing to bear the time horizon associated with different investments, that's where you're going to get the returns. That's partly where returns come from. So I like that.
Yeah, I'll just pile on that as well, the bucket. But I love that that first bucket where you go into a COVID situation and you look at your accounts and you say, "Oh, I remember now. I have this entire account of money that's just cash for the next year, 2 years, maybe 3 years, if depending on how you set it up." But that just gives you that safety. Okay, so all the money I need to spend for the next however many 1, 2, 3 years, that's there. I've already got that. So hopefully the markets will recover by that. But even if not, you've still got another safe bucket in the bonds following that usually in a recession does better. So even if the recession lasts for longer than 3 years, you start running out of that cash. Well, you still got this bond portion that probably did better. And then of course you got your long-term money invested in more risky stocks, maybe some Bitcoin.
That's like bucket 7 or something.
Yeah. Ultra high risk.
But I will tell you that we do have to be careful
anyway.
about the amount of cash we have. And I know you were
Yeah.
kind of speaking in generalities a little bit,
Yeah.
but that's the one thing where you got to balance. How much cash do I have? Because I don't want to have money just sitting around for years. That's just cash, maybe not producing. So there's some moving parts to that. But we do like
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
And we think it pairs up really well with like a dynamic spending approach as far as kind of reevaluating every year. I think you kind of need to reevaluate every year anyway, but just shifting gears a little bit, I want to hit on what about just living on my dividends and interest, y'all? What do you think about that?
The dividends
Rob?
and interest off of your 50-50 portfolio kind of thing?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you probably wouldn't spend nearly as much as you could.
Yeah, exactly.
I would think.
It would be
Is
interesting.
that what you're going down that road, Rob? I mean, Charlie?
Well, I mean, I think it's fascinating. The dividend thing is fascinating. In fact, Kevin, go ahead, Rob. What you got?
Oh, I was just going to say, what if you didn't get any dividend? What if you're
Yeah.
negative that year? What
That's
do you
right.
do?
Yeah.
Just not
So
eat?
that's right. So one of the most popular videos we've done, and I'll give the credit to Kevin, was about dividends. It just attracts a lot of attention. People want to buy these dividend players, buy dividend stocks, whatever. And those are great stocks. Those are great mutual funds, ETFs, whatever, usually. However, what I think is, my theory is that our parents, grandparents could do that. They could do that effectively. They were the big blue chippers, and they were reliable and steady, and they lived off dividends, possibly. And then they just tell their kids, hey, just get you some dividends and live off them. And so now we have people our age wanting to do that. And I'm thinking, I don't think that applies anymore. And here's why. There's a couple things that I think create problems when I want to go buy dividends and just live off of them. First of all, it skews my portfolio asset allocation. I start leaning towards all these dividend players. Again, great companies, but now you're missing out on maybe some companies that are not dividend players. Small companies, like you mentioned earlier, Rob, large value. Maybe some of these big companies don't pay dividends. And, oh, by the way, what if they stop paying dividends? Such as, for example, last year, Southwest ended its streak of, 177 quarters of dividend payouts. In fact, they had to, right? That was one of the stipulations for taking the government funding, was no dividend payouts and no stock buybacks. So people think, well, they can't cut the dividend. Well, they'd cut them all the time. 2008 dividends were cut, reduced big time. So I love dividend investing, but I do love it as part of an overall diversification plan. And you can create your own dividend. Let's say you own 1,000 companies. You're perfectly diversified, if that's possible. And none of them pay dividends. You create your own. Just sell capital gains. It's essentially the same thing. So that's my 2 cents on dividends. It's just a kind of a word of caution anyway. I think it's different, a little bit different now.
And those companies that don't pay dividends, there's a reason they don't do it, and it's because they can then take that money that they would pay out in dividends and reinvest it back in their companies and grow more. And that's typically why they don't do that. So a lot of those companies typically over time don't grow as fast. And again, this is generalization. It definitely happens, but typically over time, they may not grow as much as these companies that are reinvesting these dividends back into their company, just from that kind of perspective as well.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah.
So it's like the 4% rule is a popular rule of thumb, Rob, like you said, but how can we do this to the meat of the mission? Like, what can people do? What should people do if they're approaching retirement? What do y'all think? Any guesses?
I think the first thing, even for me, even for you, Charlie, right? Like, I have you as an advisor. And this, I don't want to get into testimonials per se, but you're my advisor, and it's nice knowing that, number one, if something happened to me, Jan and Robbie are taken care of. But number two, if something, if I'm not thinking of things correctly, we got people behind us that are making sure we're doing the right thing. So I think that's number one for me.
Yeah. I got one.
Yeah.
I think with you got to think how long do you think you will need to take money out of these retirement accounts? How long will you live? How long will you be taking this money out? Because once you do that, then I think you can really kind of nail down a little bit more accurately how much can you spend without underspending and without overspending as well.
Yeah.
So think about that. Look at your family history. Maybe that would help. Obviously, it would be really nice if we all knew when we would die, which we don't. But
that's right.
Go to a gypsy. Yeah, we recommend going to a gypsy. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. There's one of those palm readers down the street from me. You can
go to the palm reader and then go to Leading Edge Financial Planning. When you get
we can tell you exactly what to do then.
So I think number one is what you all said. Get a plan and start thinking about like how long, am I 60? Am I retiring at 60? Am I retiring at 70? What's your time horizon? How long does the money need to last? And then that's gonna be a big factor in whether the rule of thumb is anywhere near what you might want to spend. I think number two is get a spending plan. I guess that's part of planning still, maybe 1A, but how much are you going to spend? How much do you want to spend? And that's something that we go through, especially if they're in their 50s and whatnot, is like, well, what does retirement look like to you? And again, we're not talking about, I'm straying far from the 4% rule, but I think early on, if you know how much you want to spend, what kind of lifestyle you might have. The other one I have, and maybe this is number 3, what's your emotional tolerance? And we talked about it earlier. The reason I say that is because I think that should have an effect on how you invest. In other words, annuities. We throw annuities out there. Very polarizing topic in our business, but there are some low-cost, commission-free annuities that can be purchased, and they can add peace of mind to your retirement plan. They can help you, and there's been a lot of studies. In fact, I'll throw this one out there too. How about reverse mortgages? Reverse mortgages, talk about throwing a polarizing one out there. They've come a long way. They're very different. I've got a paper right in front of me by Wade Pfau. He's part of the Retirement Researcher Organization, and he's very well respected up there with Kitsis. And he talks about how to use reverse mortgages. There's a lot of things you can do on your own. There's no doubt about it. If you're willing to put in the time, the effort, and do some planning, it can be done. But this one, I think, is one of the more complicated things with the highest consequences. I mean, again, I want my family, me, you all to have a blast in retirement, especially those first 10 years, 10, 15 years when you're active and healthy before you're in a wheelchair and I'm pushing you around and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Hey, I'll pile on and get some advice. I feel like a lot of this stuff, people don't know about retirement, how these withdrawals work, and then not to mention some of the tax consequences of these withdrawals as well. For instance, RMDs are a huge one. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of those, but those are very important. I did talk to my father, and not to just roast him on this podcast. He's about to retire. And I was like, yeah, so what do you
plan,
thought
Dad?
about your RMDs and things like that? He's like, what's an RMD? I was like, what the heck's that? And I was like, all right, well, we need to talk.
What is an RMD?
It's good, dude. Required minimum distribution, Rob.
Nice.
You don't know that? No, I'm just kidding.
Hey, you better charge your dad double. That's all I'm saying.
So yeah, this would be good.
I think we could do a whole show on RMDs. Not that we haven't covered them in the past, but we could probably do let us know, folks.
Yeah. We need to know what you guys want us to hear.
Awesome. Fantastic. Anything else, guys?
That's good coverage right there.
I felt it was strong.
I do have one thing.
Oh,
you introduced this podcast as flight number 15.
Is it not
15? It's 16. Technically, it's 16.
Wow.
I know. It's crazy.
We've arrived at our final destination of whatever flight this is. It's the end. Thanks for joining us here at the Pilot Money Guys podcast. If you have questions, hit me up, Robert@leadingedgeplanning.com or info@leadingedgeplanning.com. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe button so we can reach more people. And as Emerson said, the world makes way for those who know where they're going. That's it from Leading Edge. We're out of here.
Thank you for listening to the Pilot Money Guys podcast. It has been our pleasure to share some information with you today. Give us a call to discuss absolutely any investment question you may have. Click on the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit leadingedgeplanning.com to learn more. Take care. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Leading Edge Financial Planning, LLC. Leading Edge Financial Planning, LLC, Leading Edge, is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Leading Edge and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice and should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult your attorney or tax advisor. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. These documents may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-thinking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.